You get $1,500 a month? Grandma asked. But I never got a cent. My parents stole $54,000 from my brother, then lied about it in front of everyone. I am Noah. I am 21 years old, and during my grandmother's 75th birthday party, in front of my entire family, she asked me a question that set off a firestorm and destroyed our lives. Before I tell you how I discovered a web of falsehoods so black that it nearly ruined me, tell me where you're viewing from in the comments section. The air in my grandmother Eleanor's dining room was heavy with the rich, savory aroma of roast beef and the sweet scent of cinnamon from the apple pie cooling on the counter. It was a beautiful fall evening. Outside, the leaves were turning vibrant tones of crimson and gold. The inside of the house was filled with warmth and laughter. It was her 75th birthday, a significant occasion, and the entire family had gathered. My Uncle Edward was holding court at one end of the table, telling a loud, booming yarn, while my Aunt Susan listened with predatory joy, always on the lookout for a fresh bit of gossip. My cousins were laughing, their expressions bright and carefree. For a little minute, as I watched my father, Daniel, laugh at one of my uncle's jokes and my mother, Linda, grin that picture-perfect smile, I allowed myself to feel at ease. We almost appeared regular and happy, like the family in a Thanksgiving movie. I was sitting quietly, like a ghost at the feast, attempting to absorb some of the warmth. These were moments of luxury that I could not afford. My life was a busy juggling act of classes, studying, and 2 part-time jobs that drained my energy and barely covered my tuition and low-cost accommodation. But for Grandma Eleanor, I would always show up. I'd move mountains for her. She was the sun around which our family world revolved. At 75, she was sharper than others half her age, with keen eyes that appeared to look right through you. She looked at me across the table and smiled warmly. It was a smile of pure adoration, one that made me feel seen, something I hadn't experienced from my own parents in years. She waited for a gap in discussion. Then, her clear, strong voice pierced through the lingering babble. The room became abruptly quiet. Everyone respected her. Noah, dear, she continued with all of her attention on me. I've been meaning to ask, and I keep forgetting. Is the $1,500 I send you every month enough? I know college is so expensive these days. If you need more for your books or rent, you must tell me. The fork in my hand stopped moving. It lingered halfway to my mouth, full of mashed potatoes. The world seemed to come to a halt. A dozen pairs of eyes swiveled my way. My brain tried to comprehend her words. $1,500. Every single month. That was more money than I made in 2 months of backbreaking work. I could pay my rent, buy all of my textbooks, and possibly even repair the shattered screen on my phone. With that much money, I let out a brief, puzzled laugh before I could stop it. It sounded loud in the suddenly quiet room. What money, Grandma? Silence. This was more than just a lull in discourse. This was a heavy, smothering blank. The air became dense and difficult to breathe. The laughing, warmth, and happiness had all vanished in an instant. I looked around the table. Nobody was looking at me anymore. Everyone, including my uncle, aunt, and cousins, was staring at my parents. My mother's face was a terrifying mask of frozen happiness. Her smile was still present, but it was brittle and hideous, like a porcelain doll about to break. My father's jaw had relaxed and his face had turned pale. He peered at his plate as if it contained the mysteries of the cosmos. My older brother Jason, the golden child and the focus of their existence, had a muscle jerking wildly in his cheek. The ideal family portrait had just been ripped to pieces. Grandma Eleanor's loving smile was replaced by one of cold, steely clarity. She did not need to raise her voice. The quiet venom in her tone was scarier than any shout. Linda, Daniel, explain. To comprehend the significance of that single word, you must first grasp the environment my parents had created. It wasn't only a financial lie, it was an outright lie about everything. The silence in that room was not new. It was the same silence that had accompanied each of my minor successes. The same quiet that had answered each of my whispered pleas for assistance. Over the course of 21 years, stillness was built up brick by brick. Let me give you a better picture of my life. A normal Tuesday for me began at 6 a.m. I'd drag myself out of bed in my small, frigid apartment to start my first job at the campus library. For 2 hours, I'd shelve books in the peaceful hum of the library, a dramatic contrast to my hectic lifestyle. Then classes run till 3 p.m. After class, I would not go to a coffee shop with my friends. I'd go to my second job, a greasy cafe downtown, and wait tables until 11 p.m. Shift ends. I recall one night vividly. A bunch of unruly customers had splattered ketchup across the table and poured Coke on the floor. My manager, a chronically agitated man named S., simply pointed to it and grumbled. My phone buzzed while I was on my hands and knees mopping up the sticky mess. It was an image from my brother Jason's Instagram page. He and his fiancée, Rachel, were clinking cocktail glasses on a beautiful rooftop bar, with the city lights glittering behind them. The caption said, "Living the good life." I noticed a harsh taste in my throat. I finished washing my hands raw, my back throbbing, and left with $23 in tips. That was a good existence. My brother's life was a separate novel, written by another author. In my parents' opinion, he was the hero of our family's tale. I was a footnote. They financed his downtown apartment with a view, paid for his car, and gave him cash when he needed it. They described it as investing in his future. My struggle, tiredness, and constant fear about earning rent were referred to as character building, as if suffering were a virtue. The injustice was a constant companion, a dull throb of indignation that I carried everywhere. But the true poison in our family's well sprung from a promise. A promise had been my sole source of hope. I was 18 and stood in the same dining room, clutching my university acceptance letter. I was extremely delighted to have graduated as valedictorian and received a minor academic scholarship. I assumed they would be too. My parents gave a short, "Good job, son," before giving their whole attention to Jason, who was enthusiastically outlining his new idea to launch a podcast on craft beer. I felt myself shrink, becoming invisible once more. But Grandma Eleanor noticed me. She always noticed me. She drew me into the kitchen, away from the others, and removed the letter from my grasp. She read it, her eyes full of genuine pride. "Noah, this is wonderful," she replied, her voice warm. She placed her hands on my shoulders and looked me directly in the eyes. "You have a fire in you, a brilliant mind. Don't ever let them or anyone else diminish that. Do you hear me?" I nodded as a lump formed in my throat. "Good," she replied, hugging me tightly. "Now you listen to me. Your only job is to go to that university and learn. You focus on your studies. Don't you dare worry about money. I am going to take care of you. I'll send you an allowance every single month, more than enough for whatever you need. This is my investment, and you are the best investment I could ever make." I cried right in her kitchen. I cried with relief and thanks. Her pledge was not solely about money. It was validation. It confirmed that someone in my family believed in me. That vow became my lifeline, so when I started college and weeks and months passed with no money, the confusion was excruciating. Did she forget? Did I mishear? Was I not worth the investment at all? The shame and anxiety of appearing ungrateful kept me silent. I told myself that I could handle it. I landed a job. When that wasn't enough, I ordered a second one. My entire life has been around character building. Around 6 months into my first year, I struck a wall. I was failing a course. I was always unwell, and I was about to drop out. I was desperate. I finally got up the courage to approach my mother about the money. I discovered her in the kitchen, assembling an expensive-looking bouquet of lilies. She was humming. I cleared my throat. "Hey, Mom, can I ask you a quick question?" Her humming ended. She turned, her grin courteous yet distant. "Of course, dear. It's just, did Grandma ever happen to mention anything about, helping out with my college expenses?" I attempted to seem nonchalant, as if it were no great issue. Her nice grin tightened. "What do you mean?" "Well, a while ago she said she might send some money to help out, and I was just wondering if maybe the checks got sent here by mistake or something." Her chuckle had a shrill, unpleasant sound. "Noah, you're 21 years old. Are you seriously asking me about an allowance? Your brother is out there making a life for himself, being independent, and you're here asking for handouts? I thought we raised you to be more self-reliant than that." Every phrase was a skillfully targeted dagger, meant to make me feel small and embarrassed. But, Mom, I stammered, the injustice making my face flush. Jason lives in an apartment you pay for. He drives a car you bought him. I'm working 2 jobs. Grandma promised me. Her face turned stone. Don't you dare use that tone with me, she exclaimed, her voice frigid. And don't be so selfish. We have a lot of expenses. Your brother needs our support right now. He's under a lot of pressure. Family helps family, Noah. Why is that so hard for you to understand? You should be grateful you have the opportunity to go to college at all. Learn to stand on your own 2 feet. It builds character. There it was again. Character. That was their reason for everything. I just stood there, my throat shutting and the falsehoods draining all the air from the room. She had not only stolen the money, she had taken the promise, the affirmation, the only thing that had kept me going, and turned it into a lesson about my own selfishness. I never asked again. I simply retreated deeper into myself, worked harder, and allowed the betrayal to solidify into a constant knot in my stomach. My cousin Owen was the only one who appeared to comprehend. During our late-night video talks, he saw the black circles beneath my eyes. Dude, you look like a zombie, he would remark. Let me guess. The royal parents are showering Prince Jason with gold while you're eating ramen again. His bluntness was strangely comforting. It proved that I wasn't crazy. Now, back in that peaceful dining room, the knot in my stomach was slowly loosening. The poison was spilling forth. My father, Daniel, was the first to speak. His voice was faint yet ready. Now, Eleanor, it's not what you think. It was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Grandma's voice sounded dangerously low. Yes, my mother responded, her voice unusually bright. We were just holding the money for him for safekeeping. We were going to give it to him in a lump sum when he graduated. As a surprise. The untruth was so outrageous and disrespectful that I almost laughed. Grandma did not laugh. A surprise? She replied coldly. You were safekeeping $54,000 from your son, who has been working himself to the bone for 3 years, as a surprise? Well, when you put it like that, my father sputtered. The truth is, Jason needed our help. He had a difficult situation. A rough patch, my mother said hastily. A momentary rough patch. It's all sorted now. Sorted. They had seized my future and called it resolved. I looked over to my brother. He did not look at me with remorse. He was gazing at me with irritation, as if my very existence had caused this uncomfortable situation. And I understood, with a clarity that pierced through the falsehoods and uncertainty, that this wasn't going to end. This was only the beginning. My parents' reasoning was offensive. Safekeeping? A surprise? They were flinging words at a house fire in the hopes of putting it out. Grandma Eleanor, who could recognize a bluff from a mile away, was having none of it. Her eyes were like laser beams, locked on my father. Daniel, you were a loan officer for 30 years. You understand the distinction between safeguarding and stealing, therefore let's end the games. What kind of a hard patch needs you to methodically drain more than $50,000 from your other son? My father flinched, as though he had been struck. It was an investment opportunity, Eleanor, he said, avoiding her gaze. Sure thing. It just went south. An investment, Grandma said, her voice full of disdain. And you, Linda. You went along with this investment. My mother, ever the staunch supporter of her golden boy, swelled up with rage. We were helping our son. This is what parents do. We were extremely concerned about him. He was under enormous pressure. We could not let him fail. Her voice trembled with fake righteousness. So you allowed Noah to fail instead? Grandma's question was gentle, yet it landed like a physical blow. My mother had no response to that. I couldn't be silent any longer. My raspy, rough voice cut in. What type of investment, Jason? I inquired, gazing straight at my brother. What was this sure thing that was worth my entire college savings? Jason, who had been staring sullenly at his fork, eventually looked up. His eyes were icy and devoid of sorrow. He let out a quick, dismissive laugh. Oh, please, Noah. You would not understand it. It entails risk, strategy. It's a little trickier than shelving books or flipping burgers. The insult, so careless and callous, was the last straw. Years of being dismissed, being the family afterthought, and being told my problems were for my own benefit while his failures were coddled. It all erupted into a single burst of pure clarifying wrath. At that point, I absolutely understood. They were incapable of feeling shame. They would never think they had done anything wrong. In this bizarre worldview, Jason was entitled to my future, and I was selfish for doubting it. And a terrible, chilly knowledge settled into my gut. This was more than just money. The story did not add up. Their lies smacked of desperation, hinting at something more sinister beneath the surface. As my emotional world imploded, I noticed another drama unfolding in the corner of my eye. Rachel, Jason's fiancée, had remained a statue throughout the encounter. Her face was pale, and her knuckles were white on the stem of her wineglass. She was staring at Jason, and her face was not supportive. It was one of cold fury. She was looking at him with the expression of a woman who had just discovered she had been played for a fool. When Jason made his snide remark to me, it was as if a switch went off inside her. She stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped across the floor, startling everyone. "Jason," she continued, her voice dangerously quiet and tight. "I need to talk to you. Now, in the hallway." This was not a request, it was an order. My Aunt Susan leaned in, her eyes gleaming with gossipy delight. Jason was furious, but he stood up and followed Rachel out of the dining room. An uneasy, strained hush descended once more. We sat there, pretending not to hear the angry, muttered whispers coming from the entryway. The old house has punishing acoustics. "Jason, you lied to me from the start. Where is my money? It was my mother's ring." "How could you?" The disagreement ended with a strong, definite slapping sound that rang across the hallway. Everyone in the dining room flinched. A second later, the massive entrance door crashed shut with a shaking finality. Jason reappeared at the doorway, alone. A large red handprint was starting to appear on his cheek, a dramatic contrast to his light complexion. He appeared absolutely defeated. However, his default setting was blame, not remorse. My mother went to his side, treating him like a child. "What happened, Jason, sweetheart? Where is Rachel?" "She's gone," he mumbled, eventually glancing up and staring straight at me. "She left. Are you happy right now, Noah? You and your massive drama. You just had to ruin everything." He blamed me. Despite everything, he was still manipulating the story to make me the villain. It was breathtakingly audacious. But my focus was not on his feeble attempt to distract. My gaze was focused on the floor of the entryway. A little white slip of paper fluttered from Rachel's purse during her frantic escape. It had landed unobserved on the border of the Persian carpeting. Even from across the room, I recognized the flashy golden logo, Gold and Gem Pawn Emporium. My heart began pounding in a frenetic, hard pace against my ribcage. My mom's ring. The pawn shop ticket. Everything clicked into place with terrible surety. My last traces of fear and hesitancy burned away, leaving behind a cold, steely resolve. I got up from the table. Every eye in the room turned back to me. I did not look at my parents or my brother. I focused on the one person who deserved the truth. "Grandma," I murmured, my voice wavering almost imperceptibly but full of a new and strange strength. "Please do not let anyone leave. I need a minute. I believe there are certain other investments you should be aware of." I wasn't the fearful youngster anymore. I was not the victim. I was the one with the key for the next locked door, and I was about to kick it completely open. I turned away from their horrified expressions, moved calmly into the hall and leaned down to pick up the pawn ticket. My hand was now steady. The truth was my weapon, and I was finally prepared to use it. I strolled down the hall and entered the small powder blue guest bathroom, shutting the door behind me. I needed a safe haven, a period of calm to let the screaming in my ears decrease. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door and took a deep, ragged breath. The muted voices from the dining room sounded like a hornet's nest which I had just kicked. My hands, which had been so solid just moments previously, were trembling as I unfolded the pawn ticket. The clinical, typed phrases felt like a punch in the stomach. Item: 1.5 carat diamond solitaire engagement ring, GIA certified. Payout: $2,000. $2,000 bucks. He'd sold his future with Rachel for $2,000. The sheer desperation was astonishing. This was not a hard patch. This was a 5-alarm fire, and my parents were the ones with the gas cans. My first reaction was outright wrath. I wanted to rush back in there, push this piece of paper into Jason's face and watch him squirm. But I knew exactly what was going to happen. More lies. More denials. My mother would make up an elaborate narrative about the ring needing repairs. My father would stare at his shoes. They were adept in deflection, forming a reality distortion field around Jason. I needed more than just a pawn ticket. I needed something unbreakable. Something they couldn't get away with. And I knew where to find it. Jason's previous bedroom is upstairs. He was staying there for the weekend, and the room was a fitting tribute to his stalled progress. It was a location where secrets could fester. I took another big breath, unlocked the door and slipped outside. The family was still in disarray. No one noticed me as I walked past the dining room and up the huge, curving staircase. Every stride I took felt heavy, deliberate. I was no longer a guest in this house. I was a ghost roaming crime scenes, seeking justice. The upper hall was dark and quiet. Jason's door was on the far end. I pushed it open. It produces a quiet creak. I slipped inside, my heart hammering, and softly closed the door behind me. The air in the room was a mix of dirty laundry and cheap body spray. Clothes were scattered on the floor. A half-eaten bag of chips was on the desk. This was not a man's room with investing potential. It was a teenager's den. My eyes searched the room for anything out of place. Where does someone keep their darkest secrets? I began with the desk, sorting through trash mail and old college textbooks. Nothing. I knelt and searched under the bed, my fingertips sweeping through a cosmos of dust bunnies before discovering merely a long-lost TV remote. Frustration started to set in. Was I wrong? Was this a crazy goose chase? I was going to leave when I heard footsteps down the hall. My blood became chilly. I fell back and wedged myself between the bed and the wall, my heart pounding against my ribs. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped outside the door. I could see the silhouette of feet beneath the crack. A moment has gone. An eternity. The footsteps moved on. It was probably one of my cousins going to the restroom. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, my body shaking from adrenaline. This was my only shot. I needed to find it. My attention rested on the closet. It was an old walk-in, crammed with items Jason hadn't touched in years. An old Nike shoebox sat on the top shelf pushed well into the back corner. It was covered in dust and appeared to be a lost artifact in a chaotic room. Its neglected status made it the most suspicious object there. I dragged Jason's desk chair over, its legs grinding against the hardwood floor. I clambered atop it, my balance shaky, and groped for the container. When I pulled it down, a cloud of dust exploded around me, causing me to sneeze. I returned the box to the bed and sat down, my pulse racing in my ears. I lifted the lid. No shoes. It was stuffed with papers, a jumbled mess held together by a thick, brittle rubber band. With shaky fingers, I slipped the rubber band off. It shattered and disintegrated in my hands. The first several pages contained what I expected. Delinquent credit card bills with alarming numbers and final reminders from cell phone companies. All under Jason's name. It was horrible. But that was not the smoking gun. I dug deeper. Then I found it. What caused things to alter? It was a thick stack of letters, all from the same company, West Shore Capital Solutions. The name sounded somewhat menacing. The letters themselves were written in an aggressive, forceful font. Final notice prior to legal action. Immediate payment is essential to avoid wage garnishment. These were not nice reminders. The threats came from a debt collector, a loan shark with letterhead. But that wasn't the part that made my vision blur. The name and address appeared at the top of the page. The address was for my shabby first-year dorm room. I hadn't resided at this address in over 2 years. And the loan was in the name of the person who threatened to sue and ruin them. It was not Jason. It was Noah. This is my name. I could not breathe. It felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. I frantically moved the papers. Everything was there. He could have simply accessed our parents' old tax files to obtain a $25,000 loan agreement using my name, date of birth, and social security number. There were default notices and letters charging exorbitant interest and fees. The total amount owing now exceeded $40,000. This wasn't simply stealing my grandmother's present. This was a profound and tragic violation. He'd taken my identity. He had taken my good reputation, the only thing I actually possessed, and dragged it through the mud, saddled me with terrible debt that may damage my credit, future, and ability to obtain a car loan or a house. He'd committed a felony against my brother and my parents. Did they know? Was this the tough patch they were trying to hide? The thought was a bodily blow. The $54,000 was not for an unsuccessful investment. It was hush money. It was to repay the loan sharks before they came for me. The wrath I felt previously was like a flickering light in comparison to this inferno. This was calculated. This was cold-blooded. It was the ultimate treachery. My shaking has stopped. A terrifying, razor-sharp clarity came over me. The time for fear has passed. The time for pain had passed. It was time for justice. I collected the pawn ticket and a stack of incriminating letters. I organized them into a nice, damning mound. I was no longer a victim hiding in the shadows. I was. The prosecution and all of the evidence was in my hands. I stepped out of the room, my footfall solid on the old wooden floor. I didn't return to the dining room. I went straight to the closed door of my grandmother's study. I knew she would be inside. It was her refuge. I knocked twice in a firm, definite tone. I was ready. I was going to detonate the bomb, destroying my entire family. Grandma Eleanor was in her study just as I had expected. The door was not locked. She was seated in her large green leather chair, not reading, but staring blankly out the window at the garden, which was now in darkness. A half-empty cup of tea sat cold on the coaster next to her. The strong matriarch of the dining room was gone. In her place was a lady who appeared exhausted, dejected, and deeply depressed. She looked 75 years old. She turned as I approached, her eyes clouded with weary misery. I did not extend a greeting. I didn't have the words. Instead, I approached the gorgeous mahogany desk that had been in our family for centuries. And in the warm, focused light of the green banker's lamp, I lay out my proof piece by piece. First, the pawn ticket for Rachel's ring. Then came a stack of mailings from West Shore Capital Solutions. I took the top letter, which said Final Notice in large red letters, and turned it so she could read it. "This is the rough patch, Grandma. I told you." My voice was quiet and devoid of emotion. It was colder and harsher than I'd ever heard before. "This is Jason's bad investment." She leaned forward, her forehead twisted with bewilderment. She took up the letter. Her usually calm hands trembled almost imperceptibly. Her eyes examined the page as sharply as they always did. I observed her expression as she assimilated the information. I witnessed confusion turn into incredulity, which then curdled into a dawning, terrible fear. She read the loan amount. She read the threats of legal action. And then her gaze fell on the name at the top of the page. "Noah," she muttered, her voice barely audible. She stared up at me, her eyes wide with horrible comprehension. "What is this?" "It's a loan," I stated plainly. "A loan he took out 2 years ago using my name, my identity." She looked at me and then at the letter, as if she couldn't reconcile the two realities. She picked up the next letter. And the next. Her movements became faster and more frantic. She saw the default notifications. She noticed the growing attention. She saw my name repeatedly associated with this financial disaster. When she finally looked up at me, her face was like a stone mask. The grief was gone. The heaviness was gone. The anger returned. However, it was a new and terrible type of wrath. It wasn't the burning, impetuous rage that comes from being lied to. It was the icy, deep, and overwhelming rage of a queen who had uncovered betrayal within her own court. She had just seen in black and white that her own children had not simply lied and aided, but had been complicit in a crime committed by one grandchild against another. He stole your identity, she said. It was not a question. That was the verdict. I just nodded, my throat too tight to make words. She rose from her chair. She stood higher, her spine straighter, and the entire force of her strong personality returned like a tidal wave. The exhausted elderly woman had vanished completely. They will not get away with this, she added, her voice cold. This ends tonight. She glanced at me with a long, probing look. Her eyes caught a flash of something. Was there an apology? Regret? Are you ready for this, Noah? She inquired. I am, I responded, and I was astonished by how strong my own voice was. Good, she replied, offering a single, crisp nod. She placed a hand on my shoulder as a symbol of camaraderie and cooperation. Let's finish it. We strolled out of the study side by side. It represented a paradigm change. I was no longer the forgotten grandson or the family's punching bag. I was her ally. We were two soldiers headed to combat. For the first time in my life, I was not battling alone. When we returned to the dining area, the tumultuous atmosphere disappeared immediately. The family grew silent, their arguments fading in their throats. They noticed the expression on my grandmother's face and knew the ultimate decision was at hand. Grandmother Eleanor did not return to her seat. She stood at the head of the table, imposing and regal. Jason, she said, her voice deceptively calm. Earlier this evening, you belittled your brother by claiming he did not grasp the world of danger. Perhaps you could enlighten us, explain the risk. She pulled the top letter from my palm and displayed it for everyone to see. This is a legal notification from the company West Shore Capital Solutions. They seem to believe Noah owes them more than $40,000. As this is the first we've heard about it, I'd appreciate it if you could clarify. Jason's face turned white as a sheet. He gave our mother a frantic, scared face, begging her to save him. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. Don't you? Grandma inquired, her tone dangerously gentle. She then displayed the pawn ticket. And what about this? A pawn ticket for a diamond ring weighing 1.5 carats. I suppose this is Rachel's ring. It appears that your business risks now include stealing from the woman you claim to love. Linda, my mother, had finally broken. She leapt to her feet, hands planted on the table. That's enough, Eleanor. This is a private family problem. You cannot simply air our dirty laundry like this. A family matter? Grandma's words rang out through the room, making everyone flinch. My grandson uses his brother's name to commit identity fraud, and you have the audacity to call it a family issue. My own son and his wife have lied to me for years, taking money intended for their struggling child, and you term it a family matter. This stopped being a family concern when you chose to support a criminal over your own innocent son. She raised a shaking, accusing finger at me. This guy, this boy who has done nothing except work himself to the ground to pay for an education while you handed over his future, his very name, given to an ordinary thief. The word criminal resonated around the hushed room. My father, Daniel, made a coughing noise and buried his face in his hands. Grandma Eleanor took a deep, trembling breath to restore her chilly composure. Daniel, Linda, you are currently cut off. Your financial support for Jason has ended. Every cent you took from Noah will be returned to him with interest from your savings and retirement accounts. I'll personally oversee the move tomorrow. She paused, allowing the stark finality of her words to set in. Then she executed the coup de grace. And tomorrow morning, she said, her gaze sweeping across the debris of her family. I'll be on the phone with my lawyer, Martin. I'm making an emergency appointment to fully reorganize my will and all of my trust monies, including the house, stocks, estate, and everything. Her gaze, now devoid of any familial warmth, fell on my parents. I must ensure my legacy that everything Walter and I have worked for goes to someone with integrity, someone worthy of trust. She didn't need to utter my name. Everyone in the room knew. The tectonic plates of our family had just shifted abruptly and irreversibly. I wasn't an outcast anymore. I was the last one standing. My parents' and Jason's world, founded on falsehoods and entitlement, had just been swallowed up by the earth. My mother began, her lips opening and shutting like a fish, with no sound coming out. My dad sobbed silently into his hands. Jason finally looked at me. There was no more arrogance or condescension, only a look of pure, venomous loathing. The expression of a dethroned king staring at the peasant who had seized his crown. I saw a promise in his eyes. This was not over. The silence that followed my grandmother's directive was the deepest of the night. It was a hush of complete despair. The eerie silence following a lightning strike has cut an elderly tree in half. You could practically hear the frenzied calculations passing through everyone's heads as they struggled to comprehend our family's new landscape. The power had changed abruptly and ruthlessly, and in that vacuum, my Uncle Edward saw an opportunity. He had always projected a sense of superiority, the affluent, steady sibling gazing down on my father's tumultuous existence. He pushed out his chest, straightened his already perfect tie, and spoke in a somber, condescending tone. "Well, Daniel," he continued, gently shaking his head as if burdened by my father's idiocy, "it appears the chickens have finally come home to roost. I've warned you for years that your failure to teach discipline in Jason will lead to disaster. A man must understand the consequences of his actions." He was attempting to present himself as Grandma's wise counsel in order to emerge victorious from the devastation. He was a vulture, circling, ready to pick the bones, but he'd made a deadly mistake. The most dangerous type of animal is one that is cornered and injured. My father, Daniel, who had spent his life being meek, weak, and pleasant, eventually snapped. He removed his head from his hands, his face covered in tears and snot, his eyes bloodshot and crazy. He gazed at his brother, not with shame, but with a lifetime of hate. "Discipline?" He spit, the word tinged with hatred. "You want to stand there and lecture me about consequences, Edward?" "Now, Daniel, this isn't the time," my uncle said, holding up a placating hand. "Number, you don't get to do that," my father said, pounding his fist on the table and making the silverware jump. "You can't pretend you're better than me. Do you think I'm the only one having secrets?" He gave a rough, barking chuckle. "Do you want to talk about bad investments? Why aren't you telling everyone about last spring? Why don't you tell them how you crawled to Mom on your hands and knees pleading for $100,000 to preserve your oh-so-successful firm from bankruptcy after your smart day trading hobby failed miserably?" Uncle Edward froze. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. His smug facade broke, exposing the scared impostor beneath. My Aunt Diane and his wife let out a terrified scream. "100,000? She yelled, turning against her spouse. "You told me you had a bank line of credit. You said business was booming." "It was a private loan, a family matter," Edward mumbled, his gaze darting about the room, searching for an escape that did not exist. "A loan," Grandmother Eleanor murmured, her voice cutting through the fresh layer of pandemonium like a surgeon's blade, "that I have yet to receive a single dollar of repayment for." Edward, I assume the word was short-term. The hypocrisy was sickening. The family's self-appointed moral compass was just as corrupt as the rest of them, but better at concealing it. The room erupted. Aunt Susan began sobbing and screaming at her husband. My cousin Owen looked at his father with utter hatred. He then stood up and went out of the room without saying anything. Another voice, quiet but powerful, enforced order in the midst of my family's devastation caused by greed and deception. "That is enough." Everyone froze. It was my granddad, Walter. He had been silent all night like a stoic statue at the far end of the table. He was a quiet man, constantly eclipsed by my grandmother's fire. But now, as he slowly and painfully forced himself to his feet, leaning heavily on his oak cane, he held the entire room's attention. "All of you, stop it. Now." The yelling and sobbing ceased, leaving a startled silence. He took a slow, methodical look around the table, his elderly, tired eyes taking in the full extent of the devastation. He saw my parents' abject shame, my uncle's humiliation, my brother's seething rage, and my own dismal, false victory. His gaze eventually rested on mine, and in his eyes, I saw a level of regret that shocked me to the core. This is my fault," he continued, his voice rasping from age and passion. Grandma Eleanor rushed to his side, resting a hand on his arm. Walter, no. Don't be ridiculous. This is their greed, their weakness, not yours. No, he insisted, slowly shaking his head and tightening his grasp on the cane. It starts with me. He kept looking at me as he spoke to the audience. It was my idea years ago, Noah, when your grandmother first informed me about her desire to send you money for college. I was the one who advised, Eleanor, simply send it to Daniel and Linda's account. It's easier and eliminates any complicated gift tax paperwork. They're his parents, I explained. They'll do the right thing and ensure he receives it. I thought I was being practical. I thought I was helping. He drew a ragged, quivering breath. I never expected this. I saw you, Noah. I noticed you returning home late from your employment. I noticed the lights on in your place at all hours of the night and said nothing. I assumed you were just driven, like your grandmother. I did not understand you were drowning. He fixed his saddened stare on my parents. My plain, foolish, realistic advice handed you the key to a door you should not have opened. It enabled you to betray your own son day after day for years. And for my part in that, Noah, I really apologize for my silence. I failed you as a grandfather. His admission was a stomach strike. It was not an excuse for my parents. It was a tragic origin story. It was the final, sad piece of the puzzle, illustrating how a minor, well-intentioned error might, in the wrong hands, grow into a world-shattering treachery. The fight drained out of the room, swallowed up by the gravity of his words. In the resounding silence that followed, I finally had the courage to stop it. I got up, my legs feeling more stable than they had all night. I confronted my parents and brother with quiet, profound finality rather than fury. I don't want an apology, I stated clearly and calmly. Apology means you're sorry. You're not apologizing for what you did. You're just sorry you got caught. I looked at my mother, who was crying tears of self-pity. I looked at my father, who was unable to meet my gaze. I looked at my brother, whose hostility was evident in the room. So this is what's going to happen, I explained. I am leaving this house tonight, and I need time. I need some room. Lots of stuff. Do not call me. Do not text me. Do not try to find me. When I am ready, if I ever am, I will be the first to make contact. I turned my back to them. I walked up to my grandfather and grandmother. I wrapped my arms around my grandfather's thin shoulders, hugging him tightly. Then I hugged my granny. Thank you, I muttered. And with that, I walked out of the dining room, through the front door, and into the fresh, pure night air, leaving the blazing remains of my family behind me. I did not glance back. Walking away from my family that night was like exiting a burning building. The air outside was cold and biting, but I could breathe again. The year that followed was a gradual, hard process of repair, similar to rebuilding a city after an earthquake. It was painful. It was a mess. There were days when the aftermath of sadness and wrath nearly knocked me off my feet. However, it was also the first year of my real life. Grandma Eleanor kept her promises and was twice as cruel. The next Monday, my new bank account, which she had established with a single phone call, received a deposit of $54,000. Her lawyer, Martin, added an additional $10,000 for punitive damages and mental suffering. The financial conduit to my parents' house was completely broken. Within a few months, I learned from Owen that they needed to take out a second mortgage on their home to keep solvent. They sold my brother's showy sports automobile. The comfortable, consequence-free environment they had created for Jason had vanished overnight. The freedom that money provided was astounding, but not in the way you might expect. I did not go on a spending binge. The first thing I did was leave my nighttime job at the cafe. I came in, thanked S for the opportunity, and gave him my apron. The relief was so intense that it felt as if a thick, oily coat I had been compelled to wear for years had finally been removed. I retained my modest part-time job at the campus library not for the money, but because I enjoyed the serene atmosphere. It was my refuge. For the first time in my academic career, I was not just surviving, but thriving. I focused all of my newfound time and energy into my studies. I met with academics during their office hours. I've joined a study group. My grades, which had previously been satisfactory considering my circumstances, skyrocketed. I was on the dean's list the first semester and every semester after. I was no longer the tired ghost in the back of the lecture hall. I took an active role in shaping my own future. I also learned what it was like to be part of a true family. My cousin Owen became my brother. He was my rock. He never pushed me to talk about the night, but he was always available when I needed him. He'd phone me up and say, "Hey man, I'm ordering pizza and turning on the game. Get over here." Those nights, lying on his lumpy couch and swearing at the TV, seemed more like home than my actual home did. He told me that his parents, Edward and Diane, were undergoing extensive marriage counseling. The implosion at the party had damaged their carefully cultivated image, and they were looking to discover whether there was anything genuine left beneath. "Dad's a mess," Owen told me one night. "He's finally realizing that respect is something you earn, not something you inherit." My other pillar was my roommate Leo, who was quiet and unassuming yet had a deep pool of empathy. He was the one who discovered me one night, sitting alone in the dark of our living room, staring at the wall, the phantom pains of my previous existence surfacing. He didn't say, "It'll be okay," or, "You should forgive them." He simply sat down on the floor next to me, offered me a beer, and sat there in silence with me for an hour. His peaceful companionship was more therapeutic than any words could have been, and my bond with my grandparents was restored. We had dinner every Sunday, just the three of us. It was during those peaceful hours that I really got to know them. Grandpa Walter would question me about my political science classes, and we'd have lengthy intellectual discussions. He started treating me as an intellectual peer rather than a grandchild. Grandma Eleanor would tell me stories about her own hardships as a young woman establishing a business in a male-dominated industry. They were revealing their true selves, including their vulnerabilities and strengths. They were teaching me what a heritage of honesty truly meant. My former relatives attempted to break through the wall of quiet I had created. Jason bombarded me with angry, hateful voicemails for the first few months, accusing me of ruining his life. I erased them all without listening beyond the first few seconds. Then my mother's campaign began. It was a collection of writings, each a masterclass in manipulating guilt. One would read, "Noah, I hope you're happy. Your father's blood pressure is dangerously high because of all the stress." Another, "We miss our son. This silence is tearing your family apart. It's time to let go of the anger and forgive." And the one that finally prompted me to block her number. "I don't understand why you are doing this to me after everything I've done for you." Not once did any of them include the basic words, "I am sorry for what we did." It was always about their misery, worry, and wants. It showed me that my decision was correct. They had not changed. They had just lost control over me. My phone rang about a year after the party, just a few weeks before Thanksgiving. The number was unknown. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some instinct compelled me to answer. "Hello?" I answered. A pause, followed by a voice I had not heard in a year. "Noah." "Son, it's Dad." He sounded different, slimmer and exhausted. I remained mute. "Listen, Noah," he said, and I could see he was nervous. "I know you said not to call, but your mother, we were hoping you might consider coming for Thanksgiving, just for dinner, to try and, start over, be a family again." I closed my eyes. I imagined him as a man broken not by my deeds, but by the results of his own. I felt a feeling of pity rather than rage, but pity wasn't enough to entice me back into the burning building. "I can't do that, Dad," I replied. My voice was calm, but forceful. There was no hesitancy. "I'm not ready for that, and I don't think I will be for a long time. But son, I have to go," I murmured, gently cutting him off. "I'm glad you're okay, but the answer is no." I ended the call. It was not an act of vengeance. It was an act of tremendous self-care. I had spent a year methodically creating a new life, one filled with serenity, respect, and true love. I was the architect of this new existence. Another year has gone since that phone call. I'm in my final semester of college. A few weeks ago, I received an acceptance letter to a top East Coast graduate program in public policy. It's a dream I would never have allowed myself to have when I was sleeping 3 hours a night and eating instant ramen. Life is no longer only stable, it is full of potential. Sunday dinners with my grandparents are still the center of my week. Grandma Eleanor is already organizing a trip to see me after I relocate. Grandpa Walter handed me his old, lovely fountain pen as a congrats present. For signing important things, he added with a wink. The gesture was tiny, but its significance was huge. My life is complete. My bond with Owen and Leo is the kind that will endure a lifetime. I'm even dating a clever, humorous woman from my international relations class who recognizes me for who I am, not for my past. Every now and again, while walking across campus as the sun sets or late at night in the library, I think about them. My parents. My brother. The searing, blazing rage has long since subsided. Hate is a great load, and I have worked too hard to be able to bear it any longer. What remains is a terrible, hollow regret and grief over the family I should have had. I feel bad for the mother who was so blinded by favoritism that she couldn't recognize her other child's suffering. I feel sorry for the father, whose weakness resulted in so much harm, and I feel sorry for the brother who was so preoccupied with entitlement that he saw me as an obstacle rather than a human being. The money I now see was never the main issue. The $54,000 was simply a sign of the sickness. The true crime was the gradual, methodical stealing of my self-esteem. The true betrayal was making me believe that I was worth less. Ironically, losing that money and learning the truth was the most liberating experience of my life. It made me stop waiting for their approval, to give up hope that they'd see me someday. It forced me to face myself. It compelled me to battle for my own value. They say that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I'm not convinced that is true. I believe that some things only kill you briefly, they leave scars. But I've discovered that scars do not have to be a cause of shame. They are proof that you have recovered. They are proof that you survived the struggle. My scars are a map of where I've been, and they serve as a continual, forceful reminder that I will never allow myself to return there again. They remind me that my family does not decide my worth. It's not influenced by my bank account or anyone else's opinions. It is defined by my own acts, my honesty, and my willingness to defend my own soul. It is the one thing that no one can ever take from you until you allow it. Thank you for hearing my story. I hope it touched you in some way. Have you ever had to fight for your own worth against those who were supposed to help you grow?